Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to plunge into complex topics, pull out the essential insights, and, well, help you get well-informed fast.
Exactly.
And today, we're taking a cue from someone really legendary, someone who knew the power of thinking across different fields. Charlie Munger. Warren Buffett's partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
He often said his success came from mastering mental models from all sorts of disciplines. It's a powerful idea, isn't it? Seeing the world through multiple lenses.
It absolutely is. The thing is, though, actually doing that, gaining that kind of breadth, it can feel, well, incredibly daunting, time-consuming, too.
Yeah, you think about diving into a whole new field, all the jargon.
All right, and you hit that wall wondering, how can I possibly find the time? My own field demands so much already.
Exactly. It feels like a pipe dream sometimes, something for the Mungers of the world. But what if there was a better way? A kind of strategic shortcut
Okay, I'm listening.
to quickly grasp the core of a discipline without reading, say, dozens of textbooks. The secret might not be reading more professional books. It might be reading its history.
Ah, that's a really interesting point. Because when you study the history of a science, you immediately see the big problems people were wrestling with.
Right.
The methods they came up with to solve them, and how all that shaped the approaches we still use today. It's not just trivia, it's foundational.
It's the bedrock for genuinely thinking across disciplines. And that's our mission today. We're going to stand on the shoulders of a giant in this area, Ernst Mayr, specifically through his massive work, The Growth of Biological Thought. People don't just call it a classic, they call it the classic.
It's huge, like the epic of biology.
Seriously, an authority that basically kicked off a whole new era of writing about biology's history. Published in 800,000 words. It was an instant sensation.
It really redefined things.
Oh.
So, for our deep dive today, we're going to tackle 3 key questions from this amazing book.
Yeah.
First, what actually makes Mayr's way of doing scientific history so, well, outstanding?
Right.
Second, what is the actual history of biological thought he laid out? What drove it?
And third.
And third, maybe the most important bit for you listening.
Yeah.
What's the significance of Mayr's thinking for our everyday lives?
Okay, let's get into it. So that first question, what makes the growth of biological thought so special? Why did it stand out so much?
Well, before Mayr, most books on biology's history were, well, frankly, a bit dry.
Yeah. So.
They were usually either just simple timelines, lists of events like a high school textbook,
Okay.
or they were biographies of the famous scientists, Mendel, Darwin, people like that.
Informative, maybe, but.
But Mayr believed a history of science shouldn't just be a list of what happened. It had to be a history of ideas.
The history of ideas. That's a key difference.
It is, and it brings up an interesting comparison. How does Mayr's approach stack up against other big theories, like Thomas Kuhn's?
Kuhn and his paradigm shifts. Like the move from a geocentric to a heliocentric universe. Big sudden revolutions.
Exactly. Kuhn emphasized those sudden revolutionary changes. Now, Mayr didn't completely reject Kuhn, but he felt that model didn't quite fit biology as well.
Oh, why not? Is biology's history different?
Mayr thought so. His view was that biological thought evolved much more slowly, more gradually. It wasn't these sudden paradigm shifts wiping the slate clean. It was more like a continuous process, sometimes meandering, sometimes even going backwards a bit, but always refining and reevaluating.
Okay, so not sudden revolutions, but gradual evolution of ideas. And this is where Mayr's own method becomes really interesting for us, right?
Yes, because he focused on asking really specific questions about the scientists back then.
Like what?
Like, what problems were they actually facing? What concepts and technologies did they even have available at that specific time?
Right, the context.
What methods did they use? And, crucially, what were the prevailing ideas, social, philosophical, whatever, that influenced their decisions?
That seems like a small shift, just asking those questions, but you're saying it fundamentally changed things.
Absolutely, because it's one thing to list facts, but it's another thing entirely to understand the why, the human struggle, the decision-making behind the science.
That was hard.
It was an Olympic-level challenge, honestly. Mayr needed deep insight, incredibly broad knowledge across cultures and eras, and a real feel for the social currents of the time.
So what's the payoff for us, for you listening? Why grapple with history this way?
Well, there are at least 2 big benefits. First, understanding the reasons behind events helps you see patterns.
Okay.
And that deepens your understanding of the present and maybe more importantly, gives you insight into the future.
That makes sense. What's the second benefit?
Second, and maybe more practical, you can actually distill effective methods from these historical successes, things you could apply to your own work, your own problems.
If a history book does those two things, that's pretty outstanding already.
But Mayr went further. Beyond the big patterns, he really dug into the tiny details, the nuances behind success and failure, what you might call the micro-decisions.
Micro-decisions. Give us an example.
Okay, think about Darwin. Here's a puzzle Mayr tackled. Darwin figures out natural selection around 1838, right? A world-changing idea.
Yeah.
But then he waits 8 years to publish and spends that time studying barnacles. Tiny, seemingly insignificant barnacles. Why?
That does seem weird. Holding on to maybe the biggest idea in biology to study barnacles, what did Mayr find?
He went through Darwin's diaries, his papers, everything, and he found Darwin didn't actually plan an 8-year barnacle marathon.
Oh.
He just didn't have other research lined up right then, so he started studying them almost opportunistically. No idea it would take so long.
Huh. But there must have been more to it.
There was. As he got deeper, Darwin realized barnacles were perfect for studying animal kinship, a key evolutionary idea. And here's the inner calculation Mayr saw. By becoming a top expert, a recognized systematist, on barnacles through this super detailed work, Darwin would boost his scientific credibility.
Build up his reputation for...
Exactly. So when he did publish his huge controversial theory on natural selection, he'd have more authority. Mayr really considered those personal, sometimes unstated motivations.
That's fascinating. It makes history feel so much more human and, well, strategic even. But focusing on these inner calculations, these micro details, doesn't that risk becoming really subjective?
That's a fair question, and Mayr tackled it head on. He actually said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, I can't explain history without using my own judgment, and my judgment is inevitably subjective.
Wow, he disowned it.
He did. He thought carefully considered subjective statements could actually be more illuminating sometimes, open up new ways of thinking.
I can imagine some historians raising an eyebrow at that. How did people react, and how did he avoid just being biased?
Yeah, some definitely did. The famous paleontologist G.G. Simpson apparently joked about it being Mayr's personal biology. But Mayr worked incredibly hard to avoid prejudice. He made sure he mastered tons of facts from opposing viewpoints, constantly questioned his own assumptions, looked for answers that challenged him.
So rigorous, but also willing to interpret.
Exactly. That mix of rigor, passion, and self-restraint is why he got the Sarton Medal, the top honor in the history of science. It shows his approach was respected.
That's quite the endorsement. Okay, so Mayr used this deep, question-driven method. What history did he uncover? What is the history of biological thought, and what drove it?
Right. So connecting back, Mayr strongly believed biological thought wasn't some neat straight line forward.
No clear progression.
Not really. It was gradual, evolving, sometimes even went backwards intellectually for a bit. But just for clarity, we can kind of break down Western biological thought into 4 rough stages.
Okay.
And each stage had its own characteristic problems, its own social ideas floating around, and different technologies available.
Makes sense. Let's start with stage 1, the ancient period. What was going on then?
We'll think way back. Productivity was low. Survival really depended on understanding nature.
So practical needs drove things.
Largely, yes. Problems like naming organisms, the start of taxonomy, and treating illnesses, which led to early anatomy knowledge. The main method was just gathering experience, observing. Empirical stuff.
But it wasn't just practical, was it? People must have been curious, too.
Oh, definitely. You see thinkers like Kuai Yuan in China with his heavenly questions, asking deeper things. Why do animals reproduce? What's the difference between living and non-living? And what's amazing is, even with limited tech, they came up with huge ideas, like atoms being the basic building blocks.
Wow, that early.
Yeah. And that sparked this massive 2,000-year debate. Is life just what happens when atoms combine inevitably, or is it some rare, lucky accident?
A fundamental question we still ponder. Who was the big name in biology back then?
Aristotle, without a doubt. He's often called the ancestor of Western biology.
Right.
First, to really classify organisms systematically, detail animal life cycles, write about reproduction, classified hundreds of species, dissected dozens.
What made him so successful?
He was a committed empiricist. He prioritized actual experience and observation over just abstract thinking. So, despite the limits, there was real progress then, driven by curiosity and observation.
A strong start, but
Yeah.
then things slowed down a lot.
Yeah, dramatically. That brings us to the second stage. roughly the Middle Ages, before the Renaissance. Biology basically entered a long period of, well, stagnation.
Why? Did people just stop thinking?
It wasn't laziness or lack of intelligence, it was the dominance of the Christian worldview. The prevailing belief was that the Bible held all necessary knowledge.
Ah, so if the answers are already written down.
Why bother looking at nature?
Yeah.
Exactly. All why questions basically got answered with God's will. Further exploration seemed pointless.
Is there an example of that mindset?
There's that famous, maybe slightly apocryphal story about medieval scholars arguing about how many teeth a horse has, instead of just, looking at a horse's mouth.
Right. Seems obvious.
They supposedly went to consult Aristotle's writings to find the answer. It perfectly illustrates the point.
It really does.
And it holds a crucial insight, maybe even a warning. If you believe you already possess all the truth, you lose interest in asking questions. Worse, you might even stop others from asking. It reminds me of that Louis XVI quote.
From the three-body problem.
Yeah. Weakness and ignorance are not obstacles to survival. Arrogance is.
Ooh, that hits hard. And sadly, we still see that kind of arrogance hindering progress today.
Okay, so after this period of stagnation, things must have changed again. The third stage.
Yes, the post-Renaissance period. This saw the rise of what Mayr called the mechanical worldview.
Mechanical worldview.
The Renaissance broke the grip of dogmatic authority. It championed the scientific method, experimentation, and this was massively boosted by huge advances in engineering and mechanics. Think Galileo.
Measure everything that can be measured. Make measurable that which cannot. Exactly. That captures the spirit. The world started being seen as this intricate, predictable clockwork mechanism.
And Newton really sealed the deal, right? Physics and math became the gold standard for science.
Absolutely. They were king. So naturally, biologists felt the pressure. They tried to apply these quantitative, physical methods to living things.
How did that work out?
Mixed results, frankly. For instance, they tried to explain why mammals are warm-blooded by saying it was due to blood friction in vessels.
A physical explanation.
A very fashionable physical explanation, but wrong. And it stuck around for 150 years, even though there are obvious contradictions, like, fish. Cold-blooded fish.
So observation and experiment came back, which sounds good for biology.
Is good.
But then it got sort of stuck trying to imitate physics.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It got bound by physics, as Mayr said.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that pressure also pushed biology towards more rigor, more quantitative methods, which maybe it needed.
A double-edged sword, then.
Kind of. But it definitely hindered biology from really exploring its own unique qualities, the things that couldn't just be reduced to simple mechanics. Scientists wanted recognition, so they used the fashionable physics language.
Which brings us to stage 4, the post-Darwinian evolution period.
This sounds like where biology really finds its own voice.
You could definitely say that. The context here is crucial, too. Think about the age of exploration.
Ships sailing everywhere, discovering new lands, new creatures.
Exactly. Revealing this absolutely staggering biodiversity all over the planet. And that directly challenged the dominant idea of divine creation, where every single species was thought to have been created individually.
People must have started wondering.
Some daring people did. They started asking, could all this diversity be explained without God?
A dangerous question back then.
Extremely. And then came Darwin. He essentially provided the scientific framework to answer that question.
How?
Through years of reading, observing on the Beagle voyage, thinking deeply, he proposed this radical idea. All life evolved from common ancestors through gradual change. No need for divine intervention in the origin of species.
Precisely. Now, others had floated simpler evolutionary ideas before, like Lamarck's use and disuse idea.
Right, the idea that traits acquired during life could be passed on.
But Darwin's was fundamentally different. He emphasized two key things: spontaneous variation happening randomly within populations, and natural selection, survival of the fittest. Those variations that helped an organism survive and reproduce were more likely to be passed on, leading eventually to new species.
The mechanism: heredity, variation, natural selection.
That simple phrase contained a whole new way of thinking, a new worldview. It moved the origin of species out of theology and firmly into science.
And Darwin's theory wasn't the final word, of course. It evolved, too.
Absolutely. It wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary. Scientists who came after, including Mayr himself, who was a key figure in the modern synthesis that merged Darwin's ideas with genetics, they refined it, built on it. And today, evolutionary biology keeps advancing, pushing fields like animal behavior, molecular biology, genetic engineering forward.
What an incredible journey. So we've seen what makes Mayer's history special, and we've traced this epic story of biological thought. Now let's bring it home. What's the big takeaway from Mayer's thinking for us, for our daily lives?
Well, it encourages a fundamental shift in how we see the world. Physics often gives us a picture of mastering rules, leading to precise plans and predictable outcomes.
Like building a bridge based on known laws.
Exactly. But biology offers a different lens. It shows us a world that's much more complex, fundamentally unpredictable, full of variation, but also emergent opportunity.
So less like a predictable machine, more like a dynamic, evolving ecosystem.
That's a great analogy. And within that complex world, evolutionary thinking gives us this powerful underlying logic: survival of the fittest.
Okay, but what does that mean practically?
It implies there's no single strategy that's correct forever, no universal right answer. There are only strategies that are adapted to specific environments. And those environments often change.
That feels incredibly relevant today, especially in work or business. You hear conflicting advice all the time, don't you?
Like what?
Like, should you adopt the artisan spirit, be meticulous, slow, perfect your craft? Or should you go for fast iteration, be quick, agile, adapt constantly? They seem opposite.
They do, and people really struggle with that dilemma. But the biological perspective, Mayer's perspective, actually helps clarify it.
How so?
Think about the environment. If the environment is stable, if things aren't changing much,
Okay.
then the artisan spirit is really valuable. Your carefully crafted product or service can endure because the conditions stay the same. Think of Warren Buffett investing in Coca-Cola.
Right, stable industry, timeless formula.
Exactly. Consistent demand makes that meticulous approach pay off. The artisan spirit works well there.
But what if the environment isn't stable? What if it's changing fast like so many are today?
Then the artisan spirit can be dangerous. By the time you've perfected your thing, the ground might have shifted completely. Demand disappears.
So meticulous perfection becomes wasted effort.
Potentially, yes. In rapidly changing environments, what becomes key is rapid variation and adaptation. Trying things, learning fast. That's why ideas like lean thinking and fast iteration took over from traditional business planning in fields like tech.
It's evolution in action, applied to business strategy.
Precisely. It's about adapting quickly to survive and thrive in that specific changing environment.
This whole exploration of Mayer's work has been incredibly insightful. So just to recap for everyone listening, first, Mayer's The Growth of Biological Thought isn't just a history book. It's an exceptional model of scientific history.
Right. It gives you this amazing panoramic view going beyond just facts to show how big societal trends and tiny individual choices interact. Real insights there.
Second, Mayr showed us that the history of ideas is really a history of problem solving.
And it's always shaped by the questions people asked, the social climate, the tech they had. Biological thought wasn't a straight line. It was gradual, adaptive, sometimes messy.
Not neat paradigm shifts.
Not primarily, no.
And third, understanding this history gives us more than just knowledge about biology. It offers a whole new worldview.
Yeah, moving beyond a purely mechanical view to one embracing variation, complexity, probability.
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, it gives us practical thinking tools.
Yeah.
Grasping evolutionary thinking genuinely helps navigate a complex world.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take away.
Consider how this deep dive, especially into Mayer's way of asking questions, looking for the underlying problems, the hidden influences, those inner calculations, how that mindset isn't just about biology. It's about cultivating a way of thinking, a kind of mental agility.
To do what?
To help you dissect any complex system you face, identify its real driving forces, and adapt your own strategies, no matter how much the landscape around you changes.